At the dawn of the 15th century, old Europe was in ferment, striving to cast off the shackles of the Dark Ages. Everyone wanted to put an end to corruption, the Inquisition, and the remnants of the past. The church was losing its influence, while the individual and his personal freedom were gaining strength. Martin Luther, Erasmus of Rotterdam, and Thomas More laid the foundation for the Reformation. In the light of these events, the Americas, discovered by Columbus in 1492, presented a life-size countermodel to Europe, a different cultural model, another form of civilization. If one abstracts from the practice of sacrifice, the Aztecs could be considered the embodiment of human genius, and Mexico was the alternative New World. In the early 16th century, when Spanish ships first approached the shores of Mexico, their eyes beheld a mighty Aztec Empire, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. The heart of this empire was Tenochtitlan, the capital, built on islands in the middle of the vast Lake Texcoco. The city astonished with its scale. A system of canals, wells, and dikes connected artificial islands, upon which rose majestic temple pyramids, adorned with carvings and bright paintings. Aztec civilization achieved incredible heights in various fields of knowledge. Their calendar system allowed for the prediction of astronomical events with incredible precision. Aztec healers used over 1,200 types of medicinal plants and performed complex surgical operations, including trepanation of the skull. Masterful artisans created exquisite jewelry from gold, silver, and copper, using casting, chiseling, and filigree techniques. The Aztec religious system was extraordinarily complex and included the cult of many gods, among which the central place was occupied by the god of the sun and war. According to their beliefs, the universe experienced successive cycles of creation and destruction, and to prevent the end of the world, the gods needed to be regularly offered human sacrifices. This belief defined the entire social and political structure of the empire, requiring constant wars to capture prisoners, who were then presented as offerings to the gods on sacrificial altars. The Aztec Empire controlled vast territories through an extensive system of taxes. Subjugated peoples were obligated to supply annually thousands of tons of corn, beans, chili peppers, cotton, as well as precious ornaments of gold and jade, feathers of tropical birds, and, most importantly, people for sacrifices. This harsh system bred discontent among the subjected peoples, creating an internal vulnerability for the empire. So it had been for millennia, until there appeared on these lands a great conquistador. Hernán Cortés was born in 1485 in Medellin, in the province of Extremadura, to a family of minor nobility. The young Hernan received an excellent education at the University of Salamanca, where he studied Latin, law, and rhetoric, which later allowed him to skillfully conduct negotiations and draft persuasive reports for the king. In 1504, the 19-year-old Cortés set off for the New World, full of ambition and thirst for adventure. In 1511, Cortés joined Diego Velázquez's expedition for the conquest of Cuba, demonstrating remarkable military skill in battles with the natives and diplomatic talent in negotiations with local chieftains. He earned the special trust of Velázquez. In 1518, Diego Velázquez, now the governor of Cuba, received alarming yet enticing reports from two previous expeditions to Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula led by Francisco Hernández de Córdoba and his nephew Juan de Grijalva. They spoke of rich cities to the west, where the locals wore golden ornaments and lived in stone houses. Velázquez, bound by the duties of governing Cuba, could not personally lead a new expedition and was seeking a reliable commander. Cortés had long nurtured plans for an independent conquest and had been meticulously preparing for such an opportunity. When Velázquez officially appointed Cortés as commander of the expedition, the latter immediately began to demonstrate his leadership qualities. He invested his entire fortune in outfitting the expedition, procuring provisions, weapons, and ammunition of the highest quality. His charisma and generous promises attracted, under his banner, about 600 experienced soldiers, including veterans of the Italian wars. Cortés personally selected each man, paying particular attention to harquebusiers, crossbowmen, and artillerymen. Of the 11 ships gathered in Cuba, Cortés took only 10, leaving one vessel for communication, so as to be able to receive news later from Cuba and Spain. On February 10, 1519, the ships set sail. Cortés was confident of success. On April 22, 1519, Cortés's expedition landed near the future city of San Juan de Ulua in the Gulf of Mexico. Having received rich gifts from the Aztecs, Cortés expressed his desire to meet with the Aztec Emperor Montezuma, who tried to buy off the conquistadors with rich offerings. Soon, Cortés made a strategic decision and founded the city of Veracruz on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, garnering the support of local Indian tribes, the Totonacs and Tlaxcaltecs, who were subjects of the Aztecs. Cortés promised to free them from under the yoke of Emperor Montezuma. Already on October 11th, Cortés set out from the Tlaxcaltec city of Tlaxcala with an auxiliary force of 100,000 Indians. His army was growing before his very eyes. To make retreat impossible, on the night of April 27, 1519, Cortés ordered the scuttling of his ships. According to a second version, they're burning, leaving his army only one way forward, to the heart of the Aztec Empire. Continuing the journey, on November 2, 1519, from a height of almost 4,000 meters, Cortés and his men beheld the view of the valley of the city of Tenochtitlan, the future Mexico City. The sight that unexpectedly opened before their eyes truly was enchanting. The Spaniards simply could not find comparisons to convey the extraordinary beauty of the city. In that era, the largest city in Europe was considered to be Seville, with a population of up to 50,000 people. Tenochtitlan had 10 times as many inhabitants. Everything seemed gigantic. Roads wide enough for 10 horsemen to ride abreast. The table of ruler Montezuma, which was set daily by 400 servants. The emperor's harem of 550 wives and 3,000 maids. Canals, on which constantly moved up to 50,000 boats. The conquistadors were amazed by the cleanliness and hygiene, unknown then. In Europe, Mexico seemed greater, more beautiful, and more developed than the decaying medieval Europe the Spaniards had left over 15 years before. Soon, Cortés was met by the emperor himself, Montezuma, who welcomed the conquistador very cordially, hiding his fear and hatred for the foreigners. Without much thought, Cortés took the Aztec ruler into custody. This hostage guaranteed Cortés his own safety while he took power into his own hands in the Aztec capital. In May 1520, a giant expedition joined Cortés, having sailed from Cuba consisting of 18 ships and 900 crew members. At the head of the armada stood Panfilo de Narvaez, a conquistador who had served in Santo Domingo, Jamaica, and Cuba. In Cortés's absence, an Aztec uprising against the Spaniards erupted in Mexico City, which not even Montezuma could quell. The crowd pelted their emperor with stones for betrayal and siding with the enemy. The emperor was gravely wounded by a stone to the head and died on June 28, 1520. From June 30th, that is, from the very first day after his return from Veracruz to Tenochtitlan, Cortés was besieged by the rebelling Aztecs in Montezuma's palace. Cortés, at night with his detachment, attempted to escape from the Aztec capital via one of the floating bridges that surrounded the city, but the Spaniards fell into an ambush. Hiding in the water under the bridge, the Indians unexpectedly began to strike with spears and blades, cutting the knee joints and hamstrings of the horses. Crossing to the other side was possible only over corpses. The entire Spanish detachment found itself in a trap. Of the 1,300 Spaniards who made up the force in Tenochtitlan, more than half perished. Only 600 fugitives survived that terrible night. Retreating, Cortés fought off the pursuing Aztecs. Torn to shreds, covered in wounds, the Spaniards finally reached the city of Tlaxcala. The Totonac and Tlaxcaltec Indians did not betray their friendship. And now in Mexico, there were only 2 opposing camps, the Aztecs and all the other tribes. Soon, an 18-year-old prince, Cuauhtémoc, was elected ruler of the Aztecs. This cousin of Montezuma represented the most uncompromising opponents of the Spaniards. Cortés now faced a more dangerous adversary than the soft and civilized Montezuma. The siege of Tenochtitlan became the climax of the military campaign. Cortés's army now numbered over 700 soldiers with 85 horses, 110 crossbows and harquebuses, 3 heavy cannons, and 15 light field guns. Cortés could count on forces numbering up to 150,000 Indians, ready to come at the first call. In Tenochtitlan, About 300,000 Aztec warriors gathered with their wives and children. They prepared for a final showdown with the conquistadors. The siege of Tenochtitlan began on May 30th, 1521. The city was a perfect natural fortress located on islands in the middle of Lake Texcoco. Cortés devised a complex siege plan, ordering the construction of 13 brigantines, small, fast vessels with a low draft, armed with light falconet cannons, which could operate effectively in the shallows around the city. Attacking groups of conquistadors and Indians advanced simultaneously from both flanks. 3 times they burst into the city and reached the central square, but could not hold the captured positions and were pushed back. On June 30th, Cortés, together with all his captains, led his soldiers to storm the city's marketplace. The Aztecs destroyed the causeways behind the Spaniards, and they found themselves trapped. The severely wounded Cortés was carried from the battlefield by his bodyguards, who managed to deliver him to the Tacuba Causeway. The Spaniards lost over 60 men killed. A number were taken prisoner. From a distance, Cortés's soldiers had to witness how their comrades were sacrificed, their hearts ripped out, heads cut off, and the trophies solemnly placed on the altars of the gods. The siege was accompanied by the methodical destruction of wells and a complete blockade of food supplies. A terrible famine began in the city. The inhabitants ate tree bark and even resorted to cannibalism, yet continued their stubborn resistance. On July 24th, Cortés's troops captured most of the capital. But the strength to hold back the onslaught of the Spaniards and their allies was gone. On July 30th, after a fierce battle, the temple of Tlatelolco fell. The fighting moved to the huge market square. Here gathered all the surviving Aztecs. The warriors, with indomitable courage, turned the square into a fortified camp and prepared to repel new attacks. The situation was hopeless. The young ruler Cuauhtémoc and his supporters attempted to flee the city by boat. On Tuesday evening, August 13th, 1521, amid the thunderclaps of a heavy downpour that broke over the lake, his canoe was intercepted by a siege vessel. Together with Cuauhtémoc were all the rulers of the cities of the Triple Alliance. The ruler of Texcoco, Coanacoc, and Tetelpanquetzal, as well as the ruler of Tlacopan. Cortés received Cuauhtémoc with the honors due to a ruler, but the Aztec ruler was tormented by shame, for he had fled, even though he had promised his people to die with them. According to legend, he snatched the dagger hanging from Cortés's belt and tried to kill himself. Cortés prevented him from taking his own life. He led the Aztec ruler onto the roof of one of the buildings, and there, towering over the heap of smoldering ruins that had become the giant Aztec capital, Cuauhtémoc called upon his warriors to cease resistance. This was the culminating moment. A page in the history of the Nahua peoples was turning. The heirs of a 3,000-year-old culture were losing their power over Mexico. Aztec losses were catastrophic. All texts cite a figure of almost 100,000 killed, missing, and dead from hunger and epidemics caused by the siege. Young Aztec women paid a heavy tribute to the victors, thirsty for rest and pleasure. In search of Montezuma's gold, the Spaniards subjected the last Aztec ruler and his comrade to horrible tortures, but neither of them spoke. Soon, Cortés obtained several pictographic manuscripts, which turned out to be tax revenue ledgers from the provinces. With the help of these documents, Cortés finally convinced his men that the true treasures of the Aztecs were hidden not in Tenochtitlan, but in the provinces, and sent them all deep into the country. The fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521 changed the course of world history. The conquest of Mexico marked the beginning of the creation of the first global empire over which the sun never set. The Spanish conquest led to a demographic catastrophe for the indigenous population of Central America. The unique Aztec culture was virtually destroyed. Mexican gold became a catalyst for world trade, financing European development and accelerating the transition to capitalism. The exchange between the cultures of the old and new worlds led to the transfer of plants, animals, and languages between continents. Corn and potatoes from America saved Europe from famine, while European diseases wiped out entire civilizations of the New World. This conquest long determined the fate of Latin America, creating a system of racial and social inequality, the consequences of which are still felt today. If you enjoyed our historical excursion, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and see you soon.